Good morning, good afternoon, and even good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Mark Milstein, and welcome to the DMLA panel on Taming Video Metadata. We've assembled an all-star team of panelists today, and I'm sure they won't disappoint in educating you with some of the latest developments regarding video metadata standards. But just a quick bit of housekeeping before we kick this panel off. First, I want to thank our sponsors. They are DMLA's lifeblood. Without their generous support, none of this would be possible. Those sponsors include SmartFrame, Pick Rights, Image Rights, StockTrek, Capture, and of course, Google, our diamond sponsor. For our attendees, you may toggle on your video if you wish, but your microphones have been muted by an unseeing, all-knowing team of producers from GenieCast. Each of the panelists will give a brief introduction, and they'll have about 8 minutes to tell you all of their inside secrets. We've also slotted about 10 minutes for Q&A at the very end of the session. Besides my role as DMLA Technology Chairman, I'm the founder and director of Microstock Solutions. Microstock Solutions is a global services company that provides curation, metadata, video post-production, asset management, and localization services to the visual media industry and beyond. This industry has been heralding the era of video for quite some time. Doesn't seem to be a year that doesn't go by and somebody doesn't say, this is it, this is it, this is what's going to happen. And while the internet has gotten faster and the capturing tech cheaper and more portable, and the volume of video that's being produced has increased so manyfold, video has for years lagged behind still photography when it comes to a universal metadata standard. Today's panel will give you a behind-the-scenes curtain look at how Storyblocks, one of the leading media licensing platforms, and TV station KLRU, an award-winning PBS affiliate, injected discoverability and generated greater revenue and eyes on with the adaptation of video metadata standards built specifically for video. This next hour will be a nuts and bolts conversation paneled by 5 of the principals, sharing successes and hiccups, giving participants a clear roadmap to universal video discoverability that can be cost effectively implemented with a minimal amount of effort. And never forget that great content without accurate metadata is, after all, a missed opportunity. And so I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll then throw out a question and get this panel going. And without much ado, I'd like to turn this over now to Pam Fisher, from IPTC. Pam, please.
Hi, thank you, Mark. So I'm Pam Fisher. I'm the lead of the working group for video metadata at IPTC. I've been involved with IPTC for about 5 or 6 years, first as an invited expert when we were starting to create the video metadata standard, and then as an IPTC member. And then last year I was asked to lead the working group. In parallel, I also act as Executive Director of the Media Institute, which is a spin out from University College London, doing research partnerships in media technology. So I should say a few words about what the IPTC Video Metadata Hub is all about. So if I just quickly share my screen here, clicking the right buttons. So basically what this is we've created it as both a specification with a series of properties, and also as a recommendation which looks at the mapping between different things. So you can use it as in a green field situation where you haven't already got a metadata structure, or to map between different existing metadata structures such as pbcore or schema.org or either. We have 4 categories of metadata: administrative, descriptive, rights, and technical. 90 properties overall, but with some structure within that expands the list. And the details of it are available online. You can drill down from the IPTC website to standards, to Video Metadata Hub, and then see everything we have. If I just show you. Yeah, oops. So just a quick word about the mappings that we've provided. Within video, there are we looked at a lot of we spent a lot of work into looking at the camera sources of video and picking up metadata from those, and looking at the semi-proprietary formats from some of the camera makers. We've mapped to other IPTC standards such as NewsMLG2 and photo metadata. We looked at broadcast and archive standards, pbcore and pbcore. We looked at data standards and other things. We've mapped many things, so please do have a look at that if it's of interest. And I'll just show you what you can find on the website quickly. So yes, as I say, there's the Video Metadata Hub. We have some useful tools and recommendations, and you can dive right into the detail of the recommendation here that I showed you, and the mappings here. We also have a user guide as well, which is linked from the site, where you can see some more detail about the properties and maybe make it easier to go for adoption. So I think one other thing to say is just that I think it's important to recognize that video is different than other forms of media data, in that it can be a full title, or it can be a clip. If you're doing AI work, for example, trying to generate keywords, that's not going to be on a 40-minute episode of something. It's going to be on a 40-second clip. And there are also lots of, I think the volume as well is another thing. You know, we have estimated there are something like 250 million hours of accessioned managed video sitting in vaults around the world today, and in repositories and in cloud systems. Obviously, there are lots of that's unique. So you think of all the many instances and versions and so on. But if you go back to the unique and originals, 250 million hours is quite a lot, if you think of it frame by frame, clip by clip. So, so we're talking about a large volume of data, all of which needs metadata. I'll leave it there for now.
Then we're going to turn this over to Rebecca Framero from PBS to talk to us about pbcore.
My name is Rebecca Frameo. I am the digital archivist at WGBH, which is a public metadata or public media organization broadcasting from Boston. And I'm also the head of ingest at the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. As part of that, we have responsibility for the pbcore metadata standard, which I am going to share my screen just to kind of walk you guys through the website to talk about what the pbcore metadata standard is and what it offers. So the pbcore metadata standard was originally developed by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in the early 2000s. And the goal was to provide an easy mechanism of exchange between public media stations as they were exchanging information about their programs and making them available for broadcast around the network. And in the years since then, pbcore has become adopted by a number of other organizations, both within the broadcasting and in the library and archive space, because of the specific terminology that it provides in order to better describe video content. As Pam said, video content has a lot of very specific technical properties and descriptive properties that kind of differ from the way that you need to talk about a still image or document when you're talking about the relationship between a video and between a number of, between all of its subsidiaries, between dubs and copies and clips and all of those things. When you're talking about the time that the video lasts, when you're talking about the data rate and the frame rate, and all of these considerations are things that you need to pay attention to when you're trying to manage your digital assets and your physical assets. So pbcore is intended to provide ways of talking about all of these things. It's primarily an XML-based standard, but that doesn't mean that it can only be used as XML. We suggest using pbcore as a guideline for cataloging or describing audiovisual content, as a model for building custom databases or applications, as a way to identify a set of vocabularies for fields, as a data model for a configurable collection management system that may already be in use in your organization, and as an exchange mechanism between applications. Or if you're just at the level where you're starting to create inventories of what you have, even just as a guideline for creating spreadsheets, and just kind of using standardized terminology, because that makes it much easier to exchange information both with other organizations and between other standards. As Pam said, if you're already working with a standard, whether it's IPTC or PB Core or EBU Core, then it's much easier to crosswalk it to another standard when the time comes that you need to do that work. So I just want to give you a quick tour of the PB Core website to show you how to find the information that you might be looking for about actually describing your content. So here's the PB Core website. And I'm just going to dive right back into talking about the building blocks that make up PB Core, which are the elements and attributes that allow you to describe your content. So as I mentioned, PB Core is composed of a number of different descriptive blocks, building blocks of descriptive metadata that create a PB Core record, or are going to be used as the fields in your database or your content management system, or however else you're deciding to manage your metadata. As with IPTC, it's broken down into a couple of categories, but the two largest ones are the metadata that exists on the asset level, which is descriptive content, which is essentially everything that when you're, it's the creator, it's the contributor, it's the title, it's everything that's true about the media, regardless of what format it takes. So if you're thinking about a copy of Star Wars and you have your Star Wars DVD and you have your VHS and you have maybe the digital file that you're watching illegally on YouTube, and that content is going to be the same across all of those versions. And all of those things exist within the asset level in PB Core, because no matter what format you're watching it on, it's always going to be true that Han Solo is played by a certain actor and that George Lucas is the director. And that it has that beautiful scroll at the beginning that tells you all about Star Wars. If you're talking about the actual specific media that you're looking at, whether it's that DVD or that digital file, that's when you're going to talk about instantiation metadata. That's the actual physical or digital thing that allows you to experience that content. And the metadata that exists about that thing is going to be different for every instance of that content. Where it's located on your file system, what the data rate is, what the frame rate is, what the aspect ratio is, whether it's a high quality master file, whether it's 4K or whether it's, a little MP4 that, someone's going to play on their screen. All of those things are instantiation metadata, and PB Core offers specific fields to describe that. If you want to find any of these kind of building blocks of metadata, you can look on the pbcore.org page for elements. And then we have definitions of all of these things and instructions for how they're used within PB Core. We also have a number of sample records available, so you can kind of see the most bare bones possible version of a PB Core document, which would just tell you an identifier, a title, and a description, or something that's really rich, that has multiple parts, that's maybe broken down into. This is an example of a record for a box set that we would have at WGBH for American Experience. It maybe consists of 3 films. And you'd have individual metadata about each of those 3 films that you'd want to track, and you'd want to track them in relation to each other. And you'd also want to make sure that, these films might have different producers and creators, but they're all part of the same set. And then maybe if you want to talk about how those films have different instantiations, they're each on a VHS tape, or they're each on a different DVD, but they're all part of the same set. You could do that within a PB Core record as well. I'm not going to kind of get into all the complexities of this, but I just wanted to show you where you could find examples of how those things are structured and how these things relate to each other within the context of metadata, because we all know that production environments are really complicated. And you might have all different kinds of media that have all different kinds of ways to interrelate to each other. I also want to show you just real quick before I turn it over to some of the real world examples of how other people are using metadata standards in the wild, because I know I'm running out of time. This is the American Archive of Public Broadcasting website, which uses PB Core underlying it to present metadata to the public. So we are a way for a collaboration between a number of public broadcasting organizations and the Library of Congress to save their content and present it and make it available and make it findable for researchers or people who are trying to use it for other documentaries or things like that, and make as much of it as possible as we can viewable online. So this is a raw interview from Ken Burns' The Civil War. And if you're browsing on the website, if you're just a researcher, if you're someone who's looking to maybe license a clip, you'd see the description, you'd see the date that it was created, you'd see maybe some topics that you'd want to search by, you'd see the producing organization, so you'd know who you'd have to contact in order to maybe find out more about that. And this is all kind of this human readable view that someone who was just looking around the website would see. If you go to any record on the American Archive of Public Broadcasting website, and you just type .pbcore on the end of that record, you can actually see the metadata document that underlies it. And so here you can see how these fields that are used within pbcore, the interviews, the title, all of our topical genres and so forth, are transformed into that nice view that you see on the user end. And then you can also see that we have all of this technical information. So someone who was actually looking to know, do we have only an access quality version of this clip? Do we have it in production quality? How high quality is it if I wanted to license it? Could find that information here in these technical details where it talks about the data rate and the frame rate and the frame size and so on. So those are kind of the ways that pbcore can be used both on kind of the pure record level, and how it can be transformed into usable metadata for a user that's looking for information. And with that, I'll stop for now and turn it over to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
So, as I think everybody has pretty much gathered by this point, video metadata is not your grandfather's photo metadata. Photo metadata, it was always going to be was always very, very simple. It was a simple description for the most part and a single silo of keywords. But video is not a photograph. Video is 1,550 frames per minute at minimum, and could be upwards of 5,000 plus frames per minute at a higher frame rate. And so each one of those frames demands some sort of attribution, some sort of identification. All that information that goes on within a video that happens in the first 3 seconds might never occur again till the 30th second or the 50th second. And so somehow there has to be a means of recording that and then allowing users, stakeholders to then recall that information and actually see that moment. And excuse me, that's what we hope that the adaptation of any one of these two standards will give the majority of people who are sitting in right now, who are part of a stock agency environment, where for years they adopted IPTC photo metadata as a quick fix. In other words, that was what was available at the time. It was universally available. Our contributors could apply it. It could come onto our platform. Our DAM understood it, and then when it went out to the end user, they could then read that metadata as well. And so I thought that it would be nice to turn over the microphone now to Zach Bernstein from Storyblocks, who's going to talk about how that agency, which is a digitally born agency, an agency which has been primarily a platform for the licensing of video, has begun the process of adopting video metadata standards to make their user experience and their creative experience that much better. Please, Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And so, I think you touched on a couple of really good and interesting points in there, specifically around, the differences between video and audio or video and images as it relates to metadata, and just the fact that, while an image is just one asset all by itself, a video has multiple frames. There is movement that is happening. There is time, right, that is applied to video in a way that it's not to an image. So I'll definitely speak to some of that in a minute. Just a little bit of context for me and for Storyblocks. So Storyblocks, for those who don't know, we are a royalty-free stock media licensing platform and distributor with the focus on video and audio. And so my team and I are responsible for licensing, publishing, and managing all of the assets in our library, as well as working with our contributors, our stock contributors, cinematographers, occasional partners, right, to inform, engage, and support them as they produce and upload and earn from licensing their content. And so we have on our platform, right, hundreds of these stock videographers and contributors who are uploading, right, millions of distinct video clips. And typically for us, we're not often working with reels or raw camera files necessarily. Typically, contributors are uploading processed, exported individual shots that don't even necessarily have a cut in them. So a little bit maybe less complex than something like a broadcast reel or what have you. But still, that being said, assets are coming to us from various sources, various formats, right, at various places, and so tying that to metadata, our challenge has always sort of been, okay, well, as we ingest these assets from all these different sources, how do we do that effectively, both in order to optimize and organize all of this data internally, and also to then turn that into a way to effectively deliver relevant content and relevant data and information to customers, right, as they're searching and looking for that content in our library. And so, to Mark's point from earlier, we had an advantage, quote unquote, in that we as Storyblocks started with video, and actually added an image library a little bit later, which means that we've always been sort of video centric and thinking about motion first. I put advantage in the quotes because one of the first challenges that came along was, okay, how do we ingest and apply metadata as it relates to video? And really the only frame of reference we had at the time, when we first sort of spun up and built our video upload process, was the photo metadata standards. And so we thought, well, let's at least start with that. We know it's a standard, it's familiar in the industry. Some stock contributors were also starting to transition from photography to video, right? And so we thought, well, let's build support for those fields that are already there, so that at the very least we can make our assets cataloged and searchable. And so that's what we did, and that also helped make our platform a little bit quicker, a little bit more efficient, and a little bit more frictionless, so that we could support just all this content that was coming in. And so in the early days, we referenced IPTC's standards, which helped us build the schemas in our database for storing asset data, and that really involved like just ingesting and mapping the most common fields, which are things like written metadata, the titles of a particular asset or clip, the pile of keywords, right, that gets assigned, and also the technical data, right, which primarily we pulled from the XMP or the XIP data, right, frame rate, resolution, duration, those kinds of fields. And while most of that falls to our engineering team, I won't be able to speak as much to this, but I know we use a program called FFmpeg, which is popular for both encoding as well as sort of managing metadata. And so where we are today is that, right, we have a standardized set of metadata. We have a standardized way to map it from the assets and different sources it comes from to our database, and then in turn sort of translate that into a set of search filters, features, and we're able to sort of communicate all of that out and put it on the front end for customers. And so that's where we are today. Maybe I'll pause there and sort of swing back to sort of forward-looking stuff in a moment. Want to make sure other people have a chance to speak too.
Well, I'd like to be able to, I'll follow up with a question here very quickly before I ask Amanda to jump in and talk about how KLRU has worked with pbcore, by asking you, Zach, as you have indicated to the audience that your Storyblocks is actively involved with now beefing up its metadata surrounding any one of their assets. What fields have you guys chosen out of the new metadata, out of the new IPTC metadata standard, and why? Why those fields? What are those fields going to do on behalf of the creative, the end user, the platform itself?
Yeah, so there's great questions. There's a couple easy ones that we're able to pick up on the technical side. that also like don't happen to apply to different points in an asset, like frame rate is one, right? And so that's just a super simple one, but just to illustrate, right? So we're able to pluck out all these different frame rates using IPT standard, and usually that information is captured by the recording camera itself and then already embedded into a file. Right, it's easy for us to take that field, map it into our database, and then what we can do with that information, of course, is manipulate it, compile it, condense it, right? Is there a difference between 29.97 and 30? Technically, yes, but for all intents and purposes, for an end user, like that's sort of under one umbrella of quote unquote 30 FPS. And so when we implement a search filter, we can take all this individual data and we can just write sort of one search filter, which is show me everything that has 29.97 and 30, right, FPS together. So that's sort of an easy example. I think where we're going from here are into a couple of fields that relate to the movement that happens within a video asset. And so camera movement is one of those things. And I think maybe to back up on this for a second, I think what's key for us is, the IP2 standard and even pbcore have hundreds of individual properties that each store specific information. And I think it can be really tempting to just want to boil the ocean and capture every piece of data you can about an asset or piece of content. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I think for us, we always want to make sure that we're focused on the specific problem that we're solving for customers at a given time. And so that's how we sort of pick and choose, like, okay, what's going to be the most valuable piece of data we can apply to this asset based on what the customer need is at the time, right? And so right when we started out, it was, well, okay, a customer needs to be able to search our library and find content that is relevant to that search. Let's make sure we're ingesting the descriptive terms about that asset, the title, the keywords, and now we're sort of at a point where, okay, the next step for in terms of just stock, a customer is not necessarily thinking about a piece of stock content in isolation, right? They have outside of the Storyblocks online library, they're in an editing platform and they have a project that they're working on, and they have shot A and they have shot B, and in between there is a gap, and they're looking for a piece of stock footage to fill that gap. And so it's really about, so now our challenge is sort of, well, how do we make sure that our assets are searchable in a way that helps the customer know whether that asset actually fits into their workflow? So great to know that a customer can search and find, a clip of a person walking on a street. But when we start to think about sort of the language of editing, does it matter which direction that person is walking or which direction the camera is moving, and how in the terms of a language of editing, that stock shot is going to fit between shot A and shot B in their edit? Is a shot with the camera moving left to right actually going to help their project flow a little bit better? And so that's a long way of answering the question of how we're picking and choosing what to focus on next. I think at first, with technology where it is today, we're going to start to try to automate that, to automate the capturing of that data. I think as it relates to these standards, like, we need somewhere to put it, and so having these schemas will help, like, give us that framework right off the bat.
Well, that is an incredibly detailed answer, which I think will take us really, really nicely into having our next speaker, which is Amanda Moore from KLRU, the PBS affiliate in Austin, Texas, who's going to talk to us about how she has worked hand in glove with Rebecca and pbcore to take their immense library of very, very famous content. I think, if you don't mind, I'm gonna do a bit of a promo for KLRU, because KLRU is best known for Austin City Limits, and any PBS aficionados here who enjoy great music. Oh my gosh, it is a lifetime of amazing concerts, all available every week during pre-pandemic, and now on PBS's web-based and platform, as well as on Apple TV and a number of other platforms. So without further ado, please, Amanda.
Hi everybody. Yes, so we produce Austin City Limits, the TV show. I know some folks are familiar also with the festival that has become very, very popular. But we're focused on just the TV show, which has been in production since 1974, which is, we're in our 46th season right now. And just to kind of give you a little bit of I'm going to kind of frame this within a story and then talk about pbcore and how we've applied it to our data. So we have done a digitization project in the last 5 years where we've digitized the entirety of the analog library of Austin City Limits tapes. And within that have been cataloging that material, digging through paper, talking to people who've been working on the show some of them since day one, looking at the credits in the media, gathering all the data we could possibly gather from all the resources that we can find. So we're talking about raw media. So every taping that ever happened, we've got a lot of recordings for that. We've got a lot of paper for that. We've got all just data everywhere, right? And once you get all that data pulled together, you're like, oh, well, how do I structure that data? How do I want to work with that data? And who is going to need this data? And really, my top priorities are the long-term preservation of this media, the accessibility and discoverability of that media by multiple people, including internal editors, PR, marketing, and then going into the external environment where we're talking about the pbcore kind of ecosystem, and then even further out into other systems for distribution and licensing and international repackaging and so on and so forth. So a lot of players, a lot of people searching for this data, a lot of people wanting to license this data, but if it isn't discoverable and we don't know, even for example, what songs may have ended up on the cutting room floor, we don't know that it exists. So we have to go back and, catalog all of this, which comes to us sitting in a pile of unstructured data, which is not a good place to be. So in working with the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, which is, a way for us to ensure the long-term preservation of our media at the Library of Congress through the wonderful program at GBH, used to be WGBH. I guess you guys just rebranded. The American Archive of Public Broadcasting is a great way for us to not, they get to be the true archive, whereas we get to do the work and then hand this stuff off and say, hey, yes, we're going to make our best effort as a station to preserve this stuff, but this is going to end up at the Library of Congress where we hope, fingers crossed, this stuff gets preserved in the long term. However, this data is still unstructured. So what are we going to do about that? What schema, what structure are we going to use to facilitate the interoperability, the mapability, the sharing of that data out to these other systems? And while we're looking at that, we're also looking at just the larger ecosystem. We're looking at the PBS systems where we deposit our information, where we air our broadcasts. we're also looking outside of that at other distribution points. And the conclusion is that, that for episodic media, that pbcore really does the job. And you can slot every bit of media, every edit, they've really just thought of everything. They've thought of every scenario you could possibly imagine. Incredibly flexible system, but works great for this episodic type media. And I think that, looking at some of the stuff that Rebecca was showing, and just like you see all these fields and you kind of get a little bit overwhelmed and you're like, I don't know, if you've never done this before, like, where do you start, And for us, it's a matter of saying, okay, well, what is the minimum set of data that we need to really make this discoverable? And that's really, it just comes down to like series title, awesome city limits, season number, episode number, title of the show. And then we take that and taping date and air date, and we just keep going and enriching that data down to the song level, down to the time that song appears in that media, that kind of thing. But to kind of sweep away that overwhelming feeling and those how do I get started moments, you just have to break it down to its most basic level and start gathering that data, and then you can enrich it later, because there is a place for all of those pieces to fit in. And that's kind of how we've approached this. And interestingly enough, some of the stuff that we gathered or thought was sort of, some of it's subjective, like genre. Well, that stuff has already changed over time. And so we've tossed some of that stuff out and sort of zoomed out and gone back to a less specific genre. But again, flexible. And so, we've got our data is now structured, and now our media is way more accessible, way more discoverable, and it's mappable to multiple systems outside of our asset management system. So I think as far as success stories go, and just finding that if we have a common language to speak, say, here's our schema, map it to your system, or what, do you have an API? Let's talk about that, How do we map these pieces out of our system and into your system to not only distribute, but license and make all of this more discoverable? Yeah, I think that about covers what I wanted to talk about.
I would like to follow up by asking you, as an example, do you guys ever think about, this is very much your metadata seems to be very much inward facing. It's for internal stakeholders, the production staff, the library staff, the marketing staff, so on and so forth. Do you ever give any thought to expanding the metadata to a greater audience of, let's say, the average Joe who might want to drill down and find a particular moment when Emmylou Harris might have said something, or they want to actually see her smiling, or they might want to see a Willie Nelson moment, something iconic. How has pbcore, or are there allowances within pbcore to provide for that kind of level of granularity that would be responsive to an outside audience? Because I'm thinking along, again, I'm caging, or I'm crouching this question in the way that I was particularly thinking about a stock agency. In other words, they have end users, and so you guys have less end users outside of the ecosystem of PBS stations. Am I right about that?
We actually do license quite a bit of material out for documentary filmmaking, and we do a lot of time-based metadata capture. So,
okay.
For example, a song starts here and ends here. We've captured all of that within each of our edited masters. We have some of the song data for the raw camera material that, some of that stuff ended up on the cutting room floor. Back then, literally, that, happens. So yes, we have gone in and done that time-based capture, because a lot of times people just want to edit, or people want to license a clip or a portion of a clip. And so we can target, at the very least, that song.
Right. How much muscle does all this take? How many human hours or human brain cells and eyes need to be on this content to get it to where you presently have taken the Austin City Limits series as an example to get it to that level of responsiveness? Is that a gigantic, unbelievable, pyramid building, moonshot effort?
Well, it has been extremely manual, but what we've done is basically leverage some internal resources. For example, we've got a master, folks sitting in master control, which can be the kind of job where you have a lot of extra time on your hands. So we set up folks with a system where they can just like punch in, punch out, and name something, and then we export that data. We had several people doing that over several months. So that it's a very time-consuming process to go a little bit deeper and capture those time-based pieces. But once you've got it, the value is huge, is massive.
Yeah, please. I'm sorry, Rebecca. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to jump in and add something to that, which is that first of all, as Amanda just said, once you have it, and as long as you make sure that it's standardized such that it can be processed and readable by a machine specifically, the more standardized your data is, the more you adhere to controlled vocabularies and to these metadata standards as far as building blocks, the easier it is that as Zach was saying, your system is going to be able to go through and kind of do that work for you in the future, as long as you hang on to that metadata. So the time investment that you put in now, as long as it's standardized, as long as you're using some kind of schema, is going to reap dividends on as long as you hang on to that metadata. Whereas if you don't use any kind of standard, it's significantly less likely that you're going to be able to leverage a machine to do that work down the line. Because your metadata is going to be kind of entered according to the whims of whoever was doing the work, and therefore it's not going to necessarily be matchable. When we were doing the AAPB project and we were receiving data from stations all around the country, and we got incredible data, but because most of it had been sort of entered by hand or in a pre-standards age, sometimes you get things, people would use 5 different terms to describe an HD video, and then we'd have to align all those and say all of these terms mean the same thing. We asked for a format once, and we expecting Umatic, DVCam, DVC Pro, and in one field we just had someone who just written the name Steve, and we're still not entirely sure what that meant. So when you have standards in place, it simplifies that process enormously. And the other thing is that when you're talking about technical metadata, for descriptive metadata, there's really no substitute for human eyes, human hands, the labor to get it initially. Someone has to process it. You can do machine learning to a certain extent to identify things like this is a dog. But if you really want something that's going to be usable on a richer level, there still needs to be something of that at content knowledge at this stage. But for stuff like technical metadata, if you want to know what the frame rate is, if you want to know what the duration is, there are tools like FFmpeg, like Media Info, that can generate that data for you and can output it in a standardized fashion. And that cuts down on the time and effort enormously if you can leverage those.
Thanks a lot. That nicely segues to our last speaker, Simon Malding from Capture, who's going to talk about how this amazing dam, which started off as primarily as solely a repository for photography, has evolved to also handle video. And Simon's going to talk, I hope, about the amazing asset management solutions that Capture has, that Capture offers to users all over the world. So please, Simon, without a further moment of interruption, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'll try and be relatively brief. I'm conscious of the time.
Go ahead, please.
So I know that some people in the audience are already partnered with Capture, so that's great to see some of you here. So you guys already know what we're talking about. But just to give a bit of backstory, I'm Simon Malding, CTO of Capture. Have only been in post for 18 months, but already been in the asset management, the media space for about 10 years or so. Role of CTO combines my 2 great passions, which are technology and archive media. I particularly love archive video, so that really, it's a great time to be in the industry because the use of video is massively increasing. As Mark said, our platform started off with photographs. That was what it was for. It's for photographers, for photography agencies, to somewhere to store their assets. But since then, we're a pretty innovative company, and our platform's much more than a dam nowadays, in that we deal with the entire content lifecycle. We deal with every type of content, from AutoCAD files to PDFs to Word documents to obviously images, a lot of images, but increasingly nowadays video. We have huge amounts of video coming onto the platform. We've got something like 35 million assets under management, of which 5 years ago it was 1.5% was video. Now we're already looking at 8.5% video, and that's growing all the time. In terms of ingestions, it's currently running about 50-50 video and image assets, total ingestions. So it's really all about the whole content lifecycle, from ingesting through to distribution, where companies like Zach come into it. Zach's company Storyblocks, we distribute to Storyblocks for our clients. They're one of our distribution partners, and a really good one. And because it's the entire content lifecycle, from the camera, the video camera, the bit of tape, the whatever, the hard drive it's sat on, through to a clip landing in Storyblocks system with all the metadata intact, ready to be found, ready to be discoverable, and ready to be bought. The metadata standards are really important to us. We've invested so much time over the years in IPTC standards for image assets. We do live mapping, so we take what we like is video to come in and assets to come in with all the metadata in the right places. As Rebecca was saying, that doesn't always happen. Steve as a video format, yep, I've seen equivalent of that. Yeah, and we have a team of people within the company that do the eyes-on piece that you have to have sometimes. But we also have a lot of tools to pull the technical metadata out as it comes in. We also have the tools to take CSVs full of data and dynamically map them into metadata fields in any way the client would like. We also have it at the other end of the process as well, which is kind of interesting, in that as assets leave our system, we actually map the latest metadata into fields at that point, and we map it per recipient. So we might map one set of metadata as it leaves our system to go to Storyblocks. We might map another set as Mark downloads it to use on his blog. He might want a slightly different set of metadata from the original, the original lot. So we map at point of ingest and at point of exit of the system as well to the end user. And that's quite important that we do that, especially for guys like Zach, so that as the data arrives with Storyblocks, all the metadata is in the right fields. It's ready to go straight onto their system. It requires the minimal amount of processing as it leaves our system and as it arrives, and we get to leverage that automated aspect of it, automating that piece. And in order for any of that to work efficiently, we've got to have a standard. Very easy for images, the IPTC standard's been around forever. For video, it's still a really hard process that we find video coming in is tough to deal with, and we have a team of people who deal with it. We're getting better at it, but when we first read about the IPTC standard for video, that's music to our ears, because if everyone can adopt that as they did for images, that's going to make our life a lot easier. It's going to make our systems more efficient, and it's going to make the entire delivery chain more efficient. So we are not fully compliant. There are, I believe, 114 fields. We're only up to 112. So we're getting there, yeah, we're getting there. So yeah, it's really good for us. We can be compliant on any system, and because of our dynamic metadata mapping process, we can retrofit that compliance to any asset that's already arrived with us, because obviously we have a database full of metadata, we have a mapping system to map it into an asset, we can retrofit it to data that's been with our system for years. So yeah, so as I say, it's all about the entire content lifecycle for us, and the efficiency that drives through to the end users, to even, to the distribution partners that we have, and the editorial workflow for incoming assets is going to be easier if everyone has a standard and more automated. and discoverability is key. So the entire utility and value of any asset in any system is driven by the metadata. If you don't have that good standards-based metadata, you can't find anything, and therefore there's no utility and no value to the data.
Wow, that is really, really a real great insight for all of our attendees here, and I really do appreciate all of that. I wanted to ask now, if we could please, to open up questions from the audience. I think this might be an appropriate time to allow all of our panelists to weigh in on a particular question. So I will now ask our producers whether or not we can make or somehow allow questions to start coming into us. I'll wait a few minutes, but in the meantime, I have already put together some questions. I think that I'll start off myself by asking, has anybody, both pbcore as well as IPTC, begun talks with Google about a video version of the licensable badge? We all know that Google has made an amazing announcement, not just a few months ago, about this licensable badge, which is now affixed to all stock media that is found during an image search on Google. That allows users all over the world to immediately click on it and then be brought to a licensing site for licensing, not purchase. Have any of you, by the way, have any of you, either pbcore and or IPTC, been in touch with Google about such a project?
We haven't been in direct touch about that, but it is inevitable that it's going to be happening. And it's almost harder to prevent it happening with in video than it is to make it happen. So, and we're big advocates of embedded metadata. There's all the tradition from the photo metadata community, but also there have been kind of cultural divisions within video. It's common to keep metadata external, but rights is almost the ideal pivot point where people don't have sensitivities about sharing copyright information and so on. And I think it would be a great advantage. So it's very, very a very important thing. We're doing a lot of work right now on looking at good practice for embedded metadata within video, what to do inside the boxes of ISO-based media format, where to put your metadata so it can be read by normal people, regardless of what you're using to do that embedding. So I think it's an important point. It would be a big benefit to the community, to the licensing community.
Does pbcore want to weigh in on this? Because I think it might be really interesting to hear from either Rebecca or Amanda.
I don't really have much to add to what Pam said, other than that it does seem kind of like an inevitability. As far as rights goes, pbcore welcomes, has the ability to kind of embed other rights standards in the data. We don't try and be an all-encompassing rights standard in and of ourselves. So we're kind of waiting to see what happens with that, and then we can provide better recommendations to our users about how to take advantage of it.
I see. So look, for anybody who's sitting in the audience who owns, manages, and or are employees of a agency, a licensing platform, they are listening to you guys and they think to themselves, gosh, we got a lot of video on our site, or we're starting to take in video, or we're going to consider taking in video. How in God's name are we ever going to now begin to adopt a standard as complicated or as technically disorienting for the average person as any one of the two that have been presented here? I'm curious from any one of you, what would be the first steps? What has to be done to take me from where I am right now, which is solely as a photo licensing platform, to now taking on some of the beginnings, some of the framework of any one of these two standards? What do I need to do? What's the first step?
So I can weigh in there if I can.
Please.
So the very first step, and this is something we come across every day, is to go around the office and collect the hard drives with all the video on it. That's step one, because there's a lot of that, right? That's definitely step one. But then step two from that is we are absolutely used to plug those drives into our machine. We've got a team of people who can start keywording. We have some bits of software that can start reading the technical metadata out of it. We can also recognize incorrect metadata, so we can pull it out of the wrong field and get it into the right field. We can also generate metadata from titles and from subtitles and from closed captions. You know, we do all of those things. Chapter points, if you add closed captions to chapter points within a video, you can do something like 50% of the work for the end user. So the first step is go and get the hard drives from everyone's desks and get all of that data into a system where it can be safe and then looked at. That's my advice.
Rebecca?
Rebecca.
I'm going to jump in and say at WGBH, or GBH, sorry, what we do is we make sure that there's a collaboration in order to try and get as much data as we can at the point of entry so that you don't have to go back and do the extra work later. We try and make sure that there's a collaboration between the users who are creating the content and the systems that make it relatively easy to put metadata in structured locations, and people who can review the metadata, who understand the complexities of the standard and can go back and look and say, oh, this makes sense, this maybe was a misunderstanding, maybe Steve doesn't belong in this field, because it's still, you know, it's always possible to put wrong, no matter how good your system is. There's always going to be things that don't need control, that don't have controlled vocabularies, where it's possible to put something that doesn't make a lot of sense or that isn't standardized. So to kind of have a creator putting in the initial metadata that they understand, what's this about, who's in it, what am I going to want to know to try and find it again at the point of entry, and then have it pass through both a technical, like a kind of automated systemic review phase and a human review phase, is how we try and ensure that the metadata remains consistent and is searchable within the organization.
Yeah, and a shameless plug, Mark's company can actually help you with that.
Thank you very much. That's core, that is a core competence for us, which is applying metadata to all assets, all types of assets. I got a question from the audience from Mark's son. He says, or he asks, what's the current support and compatibility of embedded IPTC metadata into modern video file formats? In other words, MP4, web, OGV, MOV, and HEVC.
I think for some, you know, it is there. The most common, there are two types of video files. There are payload files like MXF, IMF, and so on. So that's, you know, put that one side. Most files for distribution or for playing that you can actually see use ISO-based media file format, .mp4, .mov. It came from all of those, and even Matroska. You can embed metadata within video, within MP4, ISO-based media file format. It's not limited, and there are tools, underlying tools that sit under a lot of these software packages and DAMs that do this. FFmpeg's been mentioned already. GPAC does it. Even EXIF tool supports video files now. So,
right.
So yes, completely doable.
Thank you. Look, we have about a minute and a half left, and I think I'd like to be able to wrap this up right now by saying thank you to everybody. This has been an enjoyable intro into what is, I think, for many people, a very complicated subject. As I said, it's quite niche and always seems to involve a lot of technicalities, but you guys have added a really human element to all of it. And so I want to thank all of our panelists here today: Pam Fisher from IPTC, Zach Bernstein from Storyblocks, Simon Malding from Capture, Rebecca Framerow, and Amanda Moore from GBH and KLRU, pbcore, and of course me, your host, Mark Milstein from Microstock Solutions, and GenieCast, Jordan from GenieCast, our amazing silent producer here. Thank you very much to everybody. On to your next session.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate
Okay,
it.
bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye all.